My name's Jessica Miller, I'm 24, and until that night at dinner, I thought keeping quiet was the respectful thing to do. I thought if I just kept working hard, saving, helping where I could, eventually, my parents would see me for who I really was. But that night, everything I believed about family respect came crashing down. My sister Rachel has always been the golden one. The one whose every step seemed preordained to earn admiration. She's 30, works in marketing, dresses like she's walking a runway, and has this effortless charm that my parents worship. People meet her and immediately think she's the perfect daughter, the perfect sister, the perfect success story. She has that natural charisma that makes you forgive everything she does. Her confidence, her assertiveness, even her tendency to overshadow everyone else in the room. And me? I was always the quiet one, the one who worked hard but rarely earned acknowledgement. I became a nurse because I wanted to matter, to see the difference I could make every day in people's lives. I liked my work, but I didn't like that my parents barely noticed it. When I got promoted to senior nurse at 24, I thought they'd be proud. I thought they'd finally recognize me as someone capable, responsible, valuable. Instead, Mom smiled politely, slicing lemons in the kitchen, and said, "That's nice, honey. Rachel just got her company a new client in New York. Isn't that exciting?" Rachel, sitting across from me at the dinner table, glanced up from her phone and offered a small smile. I felt a tight knot in my chest. The words weren't mean, they were polite, but the meaning was crystal clear. I wasn't the one they celebrated. I never had been. Growing up, it had always been like this. Rachel's achievements were displayed on the fridge, laminated and framed like museum exhibits. My achievements were tucked away, dismissed as ordinary, as though doing well wasn't enough if it didn't dazzle anyone. She got the applause, I got the nod. She got the invitations, I got the leftovers. And somehow, I learned to accept it, to smile politely and step aside. Then came the crisis that should have shaken the balance, the one that would have proven what I was capable of. Dad's contracting business had nearly collapsed. The bills piled up, clients stopped paying, and the bank sent notices threatening to take our house. I found out late one night, my phone buzzing with a terse voicemail from Dad. "Jess, we might lose the house. Don't tell your mother yet. I'll figure something out." I could hear the strain in his voice, the tight grip of panic and shame. My own heart pounded in response. I couldn't just watch them lose everything. I couldn't wait for Rachel to swoop in with some grand, impressive solution. I had to act. So I did what I always did. I worked quietly. I logged into my bank account and stared at the balance, the money I had painstakingly saved over years of double shifts and night duty. It was supposed to be for my own future, my first apartment, perhaps graduate school, maybe even a small emergency fund for a life that felt fragile but promising. But that night, the future could wait. The present demanded action. I transferred $84,000 to cover the mortgage and debts. I instructed the bank to label it as an anonymous family contribution. I wanted to save them without the awkwardness of gratitude or the inevitable comparisons to Rachel. I wanted them safe, that was all. The next day, Dad called, elation creeping into his voice. Rachel really helped us figure out the budgeting. She even talked to the mortgage people. I don't know what we would have done without her. I almost said something, almost told him it was me, but I bit back the words. The pride in his voice, the unknowing gratitude toward Rachel, it was fragile and sincere. I couldn't take that away, so I let it slide. And like always, Rachel became the hero in their eyes. Mom whispered about her at church, the perfect daughter, the one who saved the family. I went back to my life, quietly caring for my patients, covering shifts, living in a world that acknowledged my competence but never celebrated it. Sometimes, in the quiet hours after everyone was asleep, I would imagine my $84,000 quietly holding up the walls of our home, invisible and unacknowledged like me. I told myself it didn't matter, that the reward was in the act itself, but deep down I wished someone would notice, really notice, that the shadow they all admired was built from my sweat, my sacrifice, my relentless effort. I was the shadow, Rachel was the light, and I had grown used to living like that. Until that dinner. It was supposed to be an ordinary Sunday dinner, the kind of meal where Mom fussed over every detail. Rachel laughed too loudly at her own jokes, and Dad pretended to notice the little things he didn't actually care about. The table was set with the fine china we never used, napkins folded into precise triangles, and the air smelled like roasted chicken, rosemary, and butter. The house felt warm, but beneath that warmth, there was always tension, a subtle undercurrent I'd learned to navigate, a quiet battlefield disguised as family comfort. Rachel arrived in a designer dress I couldn't afford even if I'd saved every paycheck for a year. She stepped through the door, smiling brightly, waving at Dad, and giving Mom a quick hug before perching at the head of the table like she owned it. She carried herself with that effortless confidence, the kind that made people instinctively admire her, even when she hadn't earned it that day. Mom's eyes lit up the moment she saw her, as if Rachel had just descended from the heavens carrying some celestial news. Dad poured the wine slowly, ceremoniously, like we were toasting some invisible achievement. His glass clinked against Rachel's, then Mom's, then mine. I murmured a polite cheers, holding the glass without taking a sip, my knuckles faintly white against the stem. About halfway through the meal, just as I was starting to relax, Mom leaned back and began her familiar routine of subtle comparisons. Her voice carried that practiced tone of admiration, but aimed at someone else, someone always more accomplished, more poised, more worthy. "Your sister's thinking of buying a condo in Boston," she said, carefully enunciating each word. "Can you imagine Jess? At her age, you should take some notes from her." I smiled tightly, pressing my lips together until they hurt. I'd learned early that arguing, or even showing annoyance, only escalated the family's quiet games. I had learned to nod, to breathe, to appear calm. Appear calm, yes, because inside I was a storm. Every word they threw at me, every "not quite enough" or "why can't you be more like her," built this slow, gnawing fire that I tried to smother. But that night, Mom went further. She leaned forward, fork poised over her plate, eyes bright with what I can only describe as gleeful judgment, and said the words that cut straight through the heart I had tried to protect. "You're not half the woman your sister is, Jessica." It was said like it was a matter of fact, like it was a universal truth etched into the universe itself. Rachel giggled softly behind her wineglass, shielding herself as if the comment were a harmless joke meant to amuse her. Dad didn't look up. He kept twirling his fork in the roasted vegetables on his plate, as if words could be ignored and therefore erased. For a second, everything froze. The air thickened, like it had been condensed in that moment just for me. My fork hovered midair, trembling slightly. My chest constricted. My heart pounded so loudly I could almost hear it in my ears. I felt the familiar heat of tears, the anger that had been simmering under the surface for years, but I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I exhaled slowly, carefully, letting a single measured thought rise to the surface. And then I said it, quietly, deliberately. My voice was calm, but it carried a weight I had been gathering for over a lifetime of being overlooked. "Then she can give back the $84,000 I spent saving your house." The words landed like a thunderclap. The room went silent. The wine glasses on the table seemed suddenly too loud, the ticking of the wall clock intrusive, the hum of the refrigerator unbearable. Mom's knife froze midair. Her eyes widened, and for the first time that evening, I saw something I hadn't seen in years: surprise, unfiltered and raw. Rachel's smile faltered, her giggle dying in her throat. Dad's fork slipped from his fingers, clattering onto the plate with a hollow, echoing sound. It was as if time itself paused to acknowledge the truth that had always been there but had never been spoken aloud. The quiet wasn't polite anymore. It was the weight of recognition, disbelief, and the sudden, undeniable fact that I had been the one keeping the foundation beneath them steady while they worshipped the golden child. I looked at them both, my eyes steady, my hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly my knuckles whitened. I wanted to see their reaction, not just the shock, but the reckoning that followed. I wanted them to understand that I had been there, that I had sacrificed, that I had been competent, brave, and responsible even when no one bothered to notice. And in that silence, in the space between breaths, I realized something profound. I had finally shifted the axis of the room. For the first time, it wasn't just about Rachel. For the first time, it was me. The moment hung there, taut and electric, waiting to snap. I could feel the power of my words settling, embedding themselves in the reality of that dinner, marking a turning point that none of us would ever forget. It was the night everything changed. The room went silent. I swear I could hear the ticking of the kitchen clock, each second echoing in a way that made the air itself feel heavier. The sound of it was sharper than the clink of cutlery, louder than the soft hum of the refrigerator. Time had slowed, almost stretching itself thin, as if the house itself was waiting for someone to speak, to break the tension. Rachel's smile vanished first, the easy confidence she carried so effortlessly dissolving into something raw and human. Her eyes widened, darting between Mom and Dad, searching for some explanation, some reassurance that this wasn't real, that the floor beneath her wasn't suddenly crumbling. The polished veneer of the golden child was cracking, and I could almost taste the fear in the air as it spread like a chill. Dad's fork dropped to the floor with a metallic clang, shattering the uneasy quiet in a sound that still felt muted in the tense atmosphere. He didn't reach to pick it up. He just sat there, blinking, mouth slightly open, as though trying to process a truth that had suddenly burst through all the layers of assumption he had wrapped around our family. His eyes, normally so calm, flickered with disbelief. Mom blinked, confusion overtaking the sharpness in her expression. Her lips parted, trembling. "What are you talking about?" she asked, voice tight, carefully controlled like she was trying to make sense of a foreign language. I took a slow breath, letting the silence stretch just long enough for them to feel the weight of my words before I spoke, and then I told them everything. I told them about the foreclosure notice that had arrived in the mail, the one that had made my stomach drop the moment I read it. I told them how I had stared at the numbers, felt my chest tighten at the thought of our family home slipping away, and made a decision without hesitation. How I had called the bank, explained the situation in precise terms, and wired the $84,000 directly from my own savings to cover the mortgage and prevent the house from being seized. I explained that I had made that decision alone, quietly, without seeking recognition, without even telling Dad immediately because I knew he would have panicked or felt ashamed. I had wanted to protect them, to prevent any embarrassment or conflict, to save the house and their pride in one single act. Mom's hands started to tremble as I spoke. She reached out instinctively, as if to grab something solid to anchor herself, but found only air. Her eyes widened, glistening with the sudden sheen of tears she hadn't expected to shed that evening. That was you," she whispered, her voice breaking, almost inaudible. I nodded. "Yeah, Mom," I said, my voice steady, almost clinical in its calm, though my heart was racing beneath the surface. "While you were thanking Rachel for helping you plan finances, I was working double shifts at the hospital, staying late, picking up extra hours, doing everything I could to make sure you still had a roof over your head. I did it alone. I did it quietly, because I wanted to keep this family safe." Rachel stood up, chair scraping sharply against the floor, eyes bright with anger and shame, a mixture of betrayal and incredulity etched across her face. "You could have told us," she exclaimed, the words sharper than she intended, her voice shaking with disbelief. I looked at her, calm but resolute, letting the truth hang between us like a barrier. "Would it have mattered?" I asked quietly, letting the words cut through the room like a knife. "You'd have still taken the credit. You always do. You always get the spotlight, the praise, the admiration, no matter what I do. Nothing I do counts unless it's visible, unless it's convenient for you to take it and make it yours." For a moment, Rachel opened her mouth, probably to argue, to protest, to shift blame, but I held her gaze. I could see the realization dawning in her expression, the sudden awareness that the world she had always controlled with charm and confidence wasn't as untouchable as she had believed. The perfect image she relied on so heavily was starting to crumble under the weight of my truth, the sacrifices she had ignored. Dad finally stirred, his hand brushing absently over the fork on the floor as he leaned back in his chair. His eyes met mine, confusion giving way to a dawning understanding, but he said nothing. The silence lingered, dense and suffocating, filled with unspoken emotions, unacknowledged efforts, and the quiet fury of years of being invisible in my own family. Mom's hands shook in her lap as she tried to comprehend the magnitude of what I had done. Every careful assumption she had held about who was responsible, who was capable, and who deserved praise was unraveling before her. The air in the room felt electric, tense, a charged storm that had been quietly building for years and had finally broken. In that silence, I realized something profound. For the first time, I wasn't the invisible daughter. I wasn't the shadow. I had become unignorable, and they could no longer ignore the truth of what I had done. It was a silence heavier than any argument, more potent than any accusation, because in that silence, the truth had finally been heard. Mom burst into tears first, the kind of deep, uncontrolled crying that filled the room with a sharp, suffocating tension. Her shoulders shook, her hands pressed to her face, as if trying to shield herself from the truth she had refused to see for so long. Every sob echoed through the dining room, ricocheting off the walls, bouncing off the polished wood of the table, and settling in my chest like a weight I had carried for years. Dad stayed silent, He didn't reach for her, didn't speak, didn't even glance up. His fork remained frozen over his plate, half full of food he no longer had an appetite for. His silence was a different kind of acknowledgement, one that carried the weight of disbelief, pride bruised, and the realization that he had been blind to the person sitting across from him all these years. I could see the tension in his jaw, the tight line of his mouth, the small flickers of movement in his fingers as he gripped the knife. It was quiet, but it spoke volumes. And then came the excuses. "We didn't know, honey," Mom managed between sobs, her voice trembling, raw, fragile. The words were automatic, habitual, a reflexive defense mechanism she had perfected over decades of parenting. She wanted to erase the guilt by pretending ignorance, as if saying the words could undo the years of dismissal. "You should have said something," she continued, desperate to reclaim control, to shift the burden back to me. The sentence hung in the air, a sharp rebuke, but it carried the undertone of fear, the fear of realizing that I had seen through their favoritism all along. "You made us feel guilty for nothing," Dad said finally, the words clipped, almost cold, delivered as if they were a measured argument rather than a reflection of the truth. His eyes flicked toward me, briefly meeting mine, and I could see the tension there, the understanding forming too late. The realization that the daughter they had ignored, overlooked, and underestimated for so long had been the one quietly holding the family together. For once, I didn't fold. For once, I didn't apologize. I sat there, shoulders back, spine straight, letting the silence of my resolve fill the room. I had rehearsed this moment in my head 1,000 times, but the real weight of it, watching my parents try to process the truth they had ignored, was heavier than I anticipated. Their words fell around me, ricocheting harmlessly, because I had learned long ago that my voice carried more power when I spoke only once, with clarity and intent. And I said it. I wasn't asking for thanks, I was just hoping for respect. The words didn't shout, they didn't need to. They settled into the room with quiet authority, a firm line drawn in the air. Respect wasn't a favor, I realized. It wasn't something to be earned through charm or applause. It was recognition, acknowledgement, and accountability. And for years, they had been blind to it. Rachel's reaction came next, her face flushed with a combination of anger, embarrassment, and betrayal. She stood abruptly, chair scraping against the hardwood floor with a shriek that made the dogs in the yard bark. Her hands clenched at her sides, tremors of disbelief running through her arms. Without a word, she stormed toward the front door, her movements sharp and uncontrolled. The door slammed behind her so hard that the plates on the table rattled, teetered, and vibrated against the edges of their saucers. The sound punctuated the moment like a drumbeat, marking her departure as final, explosive, and irrevocable. Mom's sobs softened into quiet hiccups, her body slumping against the table as she tried to regain composure. Her voice came out in a whisper, fragile and hesitant. "I'm sorry." The words were almost inaudible, barely escaping her lips, but the tremor in her voice made their weight undeniable. It was the apology of someone who had misjudged the wrong daughter for decades, someone who had been blind to effort, sacrifice, and integrity until it was too late to claim credit. The guilt, the shame, the shock, it all coalesced into that single whispered phrase. I didn't respond immediately. I let the words hang in the air, felt their meaning settle like dust over the room. I watched her, truly watched her, for the first time in years. Not the perfect mother I had been trained to admire, not the woman who lived in Rachel's shadow, but the human being beneath it all, finally confronting the truth she had chosen to ignore. Dad shifted in his chair, still silent, still staring at his plate, but now there was a subtle shift, a softening in his shoulders, a recognition that he, too, had overlooked me, had underestimated the quiet daughter who had carried more than anyone realized. The air was heavy, saturated with the fallout of truth, confrontation, and revelation. And for the first time, I felt something strange but liberating, power tempered with clarity. I wasn't the shadow anymore. I wasn't the overlooked one, the forgotten daughter, or the invisible contributor. That night, I became visible, not because I shouted or fought or demanded recognition, but because I refused to stay silent any longer. The silence that followed their reactions was a different kind of sound altogether. A sound of reckoning, of understanding dawning too late, of the fragile threads of family dynamics finally shifting under the weight of reality. It was messy, tense, and uncomfortable, and yet it was mine. I realized then that the fallout wasn't punishment. It was awakening, And in that moment, I understood that nothing could erase the truth I had revealed. That night, I left early. The air outside was crisp, a gentle reminder that the world continued to turn even after family conflicts had erupted in my living room. I slid into my car and started the engine, the low hum of the motor filling the space around me. The city lights flickered in the rearview mirror as I drove, their scattered glow reflecting off the windshield like shards of memory, moments of sacrifice, frustration, and finally revelation. My hands were still trembling, but not from the anger that had surged through me during dinner. This tremor was different. It was relief, the kind that comes when a weight you didn't realize you were carrying finally lifts. I thought about the years I had spent in the shadow of Rachel's perfection, how every accomplishment, every small victory, seemed diminished by comparison. I remembered nights at the hospital, working double shifts while my parents praised her for achievements she hadn't truly earned. I remembered quietly wiring $84,000 to save their house, doing the responsible grown-up thing while everyone else assumed it was someone else's credit. I had always been careful, keeping my strength hidden, letting my actions speak silently in a house that rarely listened. That week passed in a strange haze of normalcy. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and hope, the hum of monitors and the soft footsteps of nurses creating a rhythm I could lose myself in. My patients didn't care about my family drama, they only cared about the care I gave them, the empathy I carried, and the assurance that someone was paying attention to their suffering. And in those moments I began to feel something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time: ownership. Ownership of my own life, my own actions, and my own worth. Then one afternoon Dad appeared, not at the house, not with pomp or expectation, but quietly at the hospital cafeteria, standing by the coffee machine as I poured myself a cup after a 12-hour shift. He didn't say much, never his style, but the envelope in his hand spoke volumes. "You were right," he said simply. "I didn't see it before, but I do now." I looked at him, my mind racing through years of quiet effort, frustration, and overlooked contributions. His voice was husky, laced with the admission of a man who had only now begun to understand the daughter who had always been there. I took the envelope and opened it. Inside was a check, not for $84,000, far from it, but for $1,000. A symbolic start, he said. A gesture of gratitude, not repayment, but acknowledgement. And in that small envelope lay something far more valuable than money: recognition. The validation that my quiet strength, my unwavering support, had not gone entirely unnoticed. Mom's calls followed in the days after. She didn't call to brag about Rachel, as she so often did. Instead, her questions were different, simple, careful. "How were you? Are you eating enough? Did you sleep well last night?" For the first time, I felt her concern directed toward me, unfiltered by comparison, by rivalry, or by the need to elevate one child above the other. It was subtle, hesitant, but it was real. Rachel, predictably, stayed distant. She didn't call, she didn't visit, she didn't attempt to bridge the sudden gap that had opened between us. And that was fine. I realized I didn't need her approval or proximity to measure my worth. I had spent far too long chasing validation from people who measured me by their own standards, who only looked backward to compare rather than inward to see. I returned to my routine, but with a shift in perspective. I began saving again, this time not for anyone's house, not for anyone else's sense of security or pride, but for myself. Every paycheck, every careful deposit, became a statement. I am building something for me, not for the expectations of others. And as I counted the numbers, as I watched the balance grow, I felt the satisfaction of autonomy, the quiet thrill of independence, the tangible evidence that I was capable of managing my own life, my own resources, my own destiny. Each morning before I head to work, I look in the mirror. I study the reflections staring back at me, tired sometimes, but unbroken, strong, deliberate, and unyielding in the ways that matter. I remind myself, not in arrogance, not in spite, but in truth, I'm not half the woman my sister is. I am something else entirely. I am twice the woman they ever thought I could be. Twice the resilience, twice the dedication, twice the quiet fortitude that had kept this family afloat when they couldn't see it. In the reflection, I see someone unshakable, someone who has endured comparison, favoritism, and neglect, yet emerged whole, unbroken, and profoundly self-aware. That night at dinner was not the end of my story. It was the beginning of understanding my own strength, my own worth, and the life I was determined to build for myself. And in that recognition, I found freedom. freedom from judgment, from comparison, and from the invisible chains that had bound me for so long. I had been seen finally on my own terms, and that vision, the reflection of who I truly am, is a reminder that I am no one's shadow, I am my own light.